Hello, welcome one and all to our adult Sunday school class for Easter Resurrection Sunday. We are on the 20th of April here in 2025. And in our adult Sunday school class, we are in the book of Exodus, now in chapter 32. So let's go ahead and share the screen here. That's the one I want. Yeah. All righty. Exodus chapter 32, getting ready for the action-packed adventures of the golden calf. So we're in 1446 BC. It's now about August. Keep in mind, they left in the springtime, so it's been a few months. One observation, so they came out of Egypt, crossed the sea, came around to the backside of Mount Sinai, which is Jebel el-Makla in the range of the Jebel Lawz Mountains. Looks to be all the evidence fitting that. One thing that Joel Richardson observed in something recent that he had put out there was with the facing of Mount Sinai. Let's take a look here. Zoom on in here. So we've got the top of the mountain here. We've got the plateau where the elders met and had their marriage feast meal. We've got Moses' altar down here and all the people here. And this is looking from the east to the west towards the mountain. So the mountain is actually, all of this is actually facing the east. The tabernacle, when it was built and when it was put in place, would face the east. The temples would face the east. The future millennial temple from Ezekiel is going to have its entrance at the east for the prince to come through. So interesting that it's laid out the same, not only in its orientation facing the east, but also he made this observation that it's the basic layout is still the same. Here are 2.5 million people and Moses' altar in between. Here's where only the 70 elders, the leaders, came up in this plateau in between. And finally, here at the top is just where Moses by himself came, just like the high priest once a year is the only one who could go to the Holy of Holies and meet with God. So we have the same layout that would be in the tabernacle, that would be in the temples, that we're told is a pattern of heaven. We see that same layout right here on this physical mountain in Saudi Arabia. Brother Clay.
You said it already, and I just need to pick it up. What is the significance of facing east?
East is just the just as the sun rises in the east. East is the direction that everything is consistently pointing towards. Where Christ, so it's a sort of a symbolism of Christ being our morning star, Christ being our new dawn, and so that kind of imagery. But it's just an interesting that it's a consistent pattern throughout, and that even this physical mountain and the camping of the Israelites was all right in line with all of that.
The beginning of the day,
Yeah.
the start of new beginnings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with the Hebrew calendar, their day starting at sunset and ending. See, the nice thing about that is where our day, for our day, it's midnight to midnight. So it's dark to dark because it's dark at midnight. For them, their day goes from sunset to sunset. Screen just went black here for a moment. Don't know what's going on with that. Oh, there we go. Okay. For them, it's sunset to sunset. So their day starts at dusk and then it goes from dark to dawn. And so their day ends in the light. And so I think that's kind of cool there. Yeah. So again, we're in August of 1446 BC, Middle Bronze Age 2B. At this snapshot moment in time, China's being led by Emperor Huairen of their Shang dynasty. Egypt's being led in the south by native pharaoh Ibi something Matra of the 13th dynasty, and in the north by the foreign invaders Nubu-Seri Ya'amu leading the 14th dynasty, the early Hyksos made up of the Amalekites and others. Babylon's being led by Ammi-Datana, great-grandson of Hammurabi, and in the line of Christ we have the tribe of Judah, Aminadab, thinking about 98 years old or so, his son Nahshon about 39 or so. He's the 28th generation of Adam, and he'll be the leader of the tribe going out. So brings us to Exodus chapter 32, the golden calf. Let's read about this famous incident here. Exodus chapter 32. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him." Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Excuse me. I was feeling that build all morning. I was waiting for that. There we go. Then he took the gold from their hands, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into a cast metal calf. And they said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they got up early and offered burnt offerings. Excuse me. All that dust from moving or something. Yeah. And brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink and got up to engage in lewd behavior. Verse 7, then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down at once, for your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have behaved corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a cast metal calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed to it, and said, 'This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt.' Then the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. So now leave me alone, that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation.'" Pause right there. So that happened. Reactions, thoughts, or questions on what we just read, the first 10 verses? Story we're familiar with, that's kind of old news.
Well, it's the human nature.
Human nature.
Of course, I know you gotta read into like for the time, when they use that. How long was Moses actually gone?
40 days and 40 nights.
And in that short period of time.
Yep.
But Aaron was, for him to be the lead out on that
Bingo.
is, it kind of, but he ended up being the one to go in, right?
Yeah, he ended up being the first high priest. Yeah. And he was designated that before this happened. So he's already in that position. And that's why they look to him. And this is what he did with that. So there's a later passage in scripture where it says, describing the state of society, and this was God's people, as are the people, so is the priest. Meaning that the way that the people are going, that's the way the priest was going. So the priest was following the people, in other words, instead of the other way around. Yeah, instead of leading them into the things of God. So call it peer pressure, call it fear of the mob. We're not told specifically what was going on in Aaron's heart and mind, but it wasn't good based on, obviously the actions he took here. So very, very disappointing. And to your point, very, very human that this happened. The people sitting there, after all the shame, they still see the cloud, they still see the canopy of God there, that Moses, went into. But after 40 days and 40 nights, they figure, okay, time's up. And so they say in verse 1, "Come, make us a god who will go before us." Well, I don't know about you guys, but of course I do know about you guys. Little old me, my definition of God is not something we make.
Yeah.
Come make us a god. And so he does, bring me your gold and, fashion it, all that stuff. And then it said, "This is your God." Well, no, that was in our ears a few moments ago.
Right.
And now what was in our ears did not suddenly become our God. This was manufactured on this date, which was after the deliverance happened. So this is certainly not a God. It's man-made, and it's manufactured after the event happened. So this isn't any God that brought us out of that, or any true representation of. So absolutely. Then an altar is built on top of that. And so then they have all this feasting and celebration, and they end up having all this crazy orgy stuff all going on. So meanwhile, God's up there with Moses, top of the mountain there, and says, this isn't good. And has a conversation with Moses, tells him what's going on, and says in verse 9, I've seen these people, behold, they're obstinate people. Verse 10, leave me alone, that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them, and I'll make of you a great nation. Wow. After everything these 2.5 million people have gone through, at the point where God says, done with them, Moses, I'll start over with you. And we'll get to Moses' response here in a moment. Now, here's the thing. As our beloved sister Minnie would say, God is never surprised. God knew this was going to happen. He went to all this trouble with everything leading up to this point, knowing this was going to happen. There are many things in life where if I knew what a result was going to be, I wouldn't bother starting it in the first place if that was how it was going to go. But even this event, as we also know from hindsight being 2020, even this event is not the end. It's a bad place. It's a heartbreaking devastation after all that had happened up to this point. But even this is not the end. Let's take a look in, we call our place here. Let's take a look in Acts 7, where Stephen gives his spiritual accounting of the events here. Acts chapter 7. Let's pick up in verse 39. Acts 7:39. We got you bring up to verse 38 and start there just to connect everything. Acts 7:38. Acts 7:38. This is the one who was in the assembly in the wilderness together with the angel who spoke to him at length on Mount Sinai, and who was with our fathers, and he received living words to pass on to you. Now, verse 39, our fathers were unwilling to be obedient to him. On the contrary, they rejected him and turned back to Egypt in their hearts, saying to Aaron, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, who led us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him. At that time, they made a calf and brought a sacrifice to the idol and were rejoicing in the work of their hands. So I appreciate Stephen giving a spiritual description of what was happening here, how they turned back to Egypt in their hearts. One of the famous aspects of Egypt was cow worship. Cow goddess Hathor, amongst others, the bull worship with the Apis bull, all sorts of that are associated with Pharaoh, all sorts of these different things, the culture they had come out from after spending 215 years in Egypt. And so Stephen's right, of course, Holy Spirit inspired, these folks in their hearts were going right back to Egypt, going right back to the ways of the world that they were in, versus having faith, trusting what God had said and said through his servant Moses, and waiting him out and seeing him through. And we see the results of it, and rejoicing in the works of their hands. That is never a good thing. Again, we can give credit to God and glory to God for God-given ability and creativity with our hands, but to worship something we made is beyond silly. But that's human nature. The glory of me, the glory of what I've done. Well, anything of us, as said in the devotional, is from God. And anytime we take God out of the equation, we're setting ourselves up for a Tower of Babel fall. Pride goes before a fall. Satan's fall, Tower of Babel fall. Jesus kicking out the money changers. Then anything built up of ourselves is due for a reckoning. And so, yeah. Any reactions to what Stevens has to say here? Pretty straightforward. One more passage for the moment. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul telling the New Testament church at Corinth that these things that happened were for us to learn from. Look and good or bad. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10, let's look at verse 7. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. And on from there. So, quoting this passage here, he says, these are things to avoid. They fell into idolatry, and as we'll see, it didn't work out too well for them. And we'll go from there. So, let's see. Here's what I have for us. Let's do this. I know we watched the film Journey to Mount Sinai Part 2, but I wanted to especially bring up this section right here dealing with the episode of the golden calf. So here's a refresh on this.
The Exodus is the first time in recorded history where God tells a nation to come and worship him and him alone. According to the biblical text, on the third day after their arrival, Moses gathered the Israelites at the foot of the mountain, and God came down in fire and smoke and spoke to the people. The terms of the covenant were presented to the Israelites in 10 commandments. The first of these being that they would have no other gods and make no idols. And the Israelites agreed, but that didn't last very long. Is there evidence for golden calf worship? DeMille's 1923 version of the 10 Commandments was one of the first to portray these events for the cinema. Moses went up to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, where he received written tablets of the 10 Commandments.
When the people saw that Moses was delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us gods who shall go before us." So Aaron said to them, "Take off your rings of gold and bring them to me." He received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool, made a golden calf, and they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play.
Okay, we've come into an area called Jebel Laws. In this area, we found a fenced-off archaeological site. Got some rock carvings. We can't get into the area, but you can see what we need to see through the fence. Get the best views that I can get up on the top area there.
You look across the valley and you see this big pile of stones that goes up 30 feet, and it's this big monolith that comes out of the sand, and it has bulls inscribed on the side of it and pictures of bovine all around this altar site.
Many of the Exodus explorers believe the worship of the golden calf happened at this pile of boulders because of these depictions of bulls, as well as other bull inscriptions nearby.
So the Bible says that the golden calf altar was in front of the actual golden calf. So if the golden calf was up there on the platform, like you would assume, so everyone could see it and worship it, then there should be a separate altar section in front of it.
David Roll, however, sees no connection.
I personally found thousands of rock carvings of bulls and cattle. Huge ones, 1.5 meters, 2 meters wide. It's very, very common in that region. It's got absolutely nothing to do with Moses and the Bronze Age. It's actually the Stone Age we're dealing with.
Egyptian culture practiced the worship of many gods, including bulls and cows. A person with raised arms was a common way to portray praise. After centuries of living in Egypt, the Israelites would have been very familiar with these forms of worship.
If you look at Egyptian religious iconography, I've got this picture from the tomb of Pharaoh Seti. It's very specific. It's got a picture of a person actually underneath the cow. You've got a person behind the cow holding the tail. Very specific imagery. When you look at some of the murals that are surrounding the golden calf altar, you have these exact images. You have a person underneath the cow, exactly like what we see in the Valley of the Kings. We see pictures of people holding the tails of the cows. This is Egyptian religious iconography. This is not just farmers or hunting scenes or this sort of thing.
But Herschel Shanks, the founder of Biblical Archaeology Review, is skeptical of the whole idea.
The idea that the altar that Aaron built the golden calf on has survived like this is sitting there. Wow. These pictures put together, whole jumble of questions. You don't know what period they're from. They haven't been looked at scientifically.
Although Glenn Fritz favors Jebel Makla, he does not think the bull images are connected to the worship of the golden calf. I think the most interesting image for me was this one right here.
Yes, and I think the main point here is the dating of these items generally far precedes the time of the Exodus.
The other thing is that it didn't say that they carved bulls on the rocks, right?
Right.
The Saudi Al-Bid book states that the inscriptions in the area date from a range between 3000 and 1500 BC. Joe Richardson argues that the end of this range actually puts them right up to the era of the Exodus.
The scriptures say that the people ate and drank and they rose up to play. And that's exactly what the petroglyphs portray.
Down off the mountain and he sees that the people are completely wild. They're completely indulgent. They've lost all sense of right and wrong. The people had made a graven image, a golden calf, and he is deeply disturbed. And he throws the tablets down and they break. Moses then calls to the people and says, "Who is loyal to God? Come and join me." And the tribe of Levi shows up and he tells them to arm themselves and to kill whoever worshiped or served the idol, even if it's your close friend, your relative, your neighbor. And they do, and 3,000 people are killed that day.
Joe Richardson took these photos in the campsite area. He wonders if these could be depictions of idol worshippers with their arms raised and pierced by swords, just as described in the Bible. But there was something more nearby.
The Caldwells have found a huge area that seems to resemble a graveyard.
Big marker right here. See any scientific petroglyphs at all?
Why should one find a graveyard, thousands of graves, in the middle of the wilderness, in a desert?
6 feet tall.
It's an enormous graveyard. It extends all the way across to the other side of the mountain, and it's literally filled with these standing stone markers.
The cemetery itself is very impressive. Me and my colleagues have excavated many cemetery fields. When you get a huge cemetery field with megaliths like this, it's very unique.
Why is this here? Why is this 21 football field sized area? Why is it there? Because there have never been large populations living in this area of Jebel Lawz. So why would you need a large cemetery? Well, if the Exodus occurred in this area, and specifically the golden calf worship, that could explain it. The idea is that if you have to bury 3,000 people all of a sudden, that mass graveyard would not be located where the encampment was. It would be outside of the encampment area. And this graveyard is about 4.5 miles up the wadi from the base of Jebel Makla.
Just one thing found there matching the biblical narrative is interesting. Two things becomes more interesting. Three becomes almost compelling. But you get 4 and 5 and 6, then it becomes overwhelming that something significant has happened here a long time ago.
Personally, I believe the Lord has purposefully preserved the real Mount Sinai for this very hour. He's about to say to the whole world, remember the mighty things that I did when I led Israel out of Egypt with a mighty and outstretched hand. When I ripped the ocean in half, when I brought forth water from the rock, all of these things. He's about to remind the world, remember this? I've preserved all of the evidence. It's sitting out there for everyone to see.
So with that, reactions, thoughts, questions. Yes, we kind of went through the movie. Since we're at the golden calf now, I figured it'd be appropriate to refresh that. Yeah, yeah. So the one that really gets my attention now, me personally, that right there.
Yeah,
Who? Go ahead.
well, no, you go ahead, what you were gonna say.
If you're going to do rock art, if you're going to break out your crayons or whatever and carve into the rocks, you're probably going to want to do happy things. You're probably going to do things, that celebrate, worship or whatever. But to put up there, of all things, and it seems pretty fairly clear that this is a dude and that's a sword with a handle going through him. Yeah, something significant happened there, Brother Clay.
Oh, I was gonna say how, how the artwork is terrible. It's like a second grader. I mean, first, yeah, you definitely look at it, but the legs and, the tail, it looks.
That's why they're called the children of Israel.
But yeah, it's just, kind of basic, I mean, that's, that's what you look at and you see, but. Anyway.
Brendan, who's ever tried carving into rock? It's effort.
I was gonna say that's hard.
Yeah. Well, and it survived all these years too.
Yeah. So
all these hundreds.
it's not
Yeah.
paint, right?
Yeah. And so I think they probably kept it simplistic just to, but that's one of the points. So listening to these different men, scholars, make their different points. Certainly there have been rock carvings of cows and bulls and things for thousands of years before the Exodus. Sure, we get that. Stone Age forward. I agree with David Roll on that. But I also agree with Joel Richardson and Dr. Glenn Fritz, who I normally pretty much agree with on almost everything except the age of the rocks. Yeah, I believe in young Earth. He agrees with David Roll on the fact that, okay, this is earlier stuff. But then when they look at the range that's given, this is where I tend to go more with Joel Richardson, who says, but the age range for this given brings you right up to the Exodus. 1500 BC, Exodus 1446 BC, it's right there. And the fact that, as he points out, these aren't just, like you normally see, these aren't just farming or hunting scenes. These are scenes of worship, and especially specific images that are in Egypt worship, like the guy with the raised hands underneath the cow, the guy holding the cow's tail. And specifically this one depicting an event, who's going to draw that or carve that unless something significant happened here. Right. So in this case, it seems to me that Joel Richardson has the most significant, most consistent with the scripture thing. And as the filmmaker Timothy Mahoney rightly points out, there's nothing in the Bible about any carvings whatsoever. So they could have happened, maybe they didn't happen. The Bible doesn't require there to be carvings. Doesn't say that there were. Doesn't say there weren't either. And so the main thing here is we see a lot kind of lining up. So let's look to the scriptures about this. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 32. We read the first 10 verses. By the way, let's exit out of this here. Go back here. So there's the top of the mountain. There's the range. So there's our guy, Joel Richardson. There's the area of the land and the boundaries that were given. Moses' altar that we've talked about. Moses' altar. Boom. Here's the place where those cow drawings are. That's the area they're talking about. So Exodus chapter 32 is where we'll be picking up. Beg your pardon? We actually just read verse 10, where God says, so now leave me alone, talking to Moses on top of the mountain, telling Moses what happened. God said in verse 10, so now leave me alone, that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them, and I'll make of you a great nation. So after all the stuff God has done, he's ready to break covenant with them. He says, basically, they've broken the covenant, and now I'm going to start over with you, is God's plan that he's telling Moses here. By the way, Joel Richardson makes the point in his book From Sinai to Zion that the molten calf that Aaron crafted was actually made of wood, but overlaid with gold. So technical spec there. And where some of your Bibles, it might say they rose up to play, or in mine, it says they got up to engage in lewd behavior, NASB 2020. Richardson marks this. Old Testament scholar Walter Kaiser Jr. describes the meaning of this passage. The people satisfy their own desires and proceed to indulge in revelry. The verb, in there the Hebrew, sahak, signifies drunken, immoral orgies and sexual play. That's what was going on. It wasn't just, oh, let's play Ring Around the Rosie or anything. No, it was debauchery, as we would say. So, okay, let's pick up in verse 11. So God says, I'm done with these people. I'll start over with you. What's Moses' response? Verse 11. Then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your anger burn against your people, whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians talk, saying, with evil motives he brought them out, to kill them on the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent of doing harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by yourself, and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and all the land which I have spoken I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So the Lord relented of the harm which he said he would do to his people. Verse 15, then Moses turned, went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides. They're written on one side and the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing, engraved on the tablets. Now when Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's a sound of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the sound of the cry of victory, nor is it the sound of the cry of defeat, but I heard the sound of singing. And not a good thing that they're singing here. So in verses, so talking about the corruption here of these people, the Hebrew word here, this is from Richardson, the same word that was used in Genesis 6, verse 12, for the corruption the whole world had given itself over to in Noah's day. The remedy then was nothing short of a total purge and complete annihilation. So that same word for corruption is now here. But again, God said he's not going to destroy the whole world, but that's these people right here. So Moses intercedes with the people. God, he doesn't say, sounds good to me, God, let's forget these folks and go on our merry way. Moses intercedes and he says, don't let the bad guys say, hey, you just brought them out here to kill them. Don't let the bad guys say you couldn't deliver. Remember the promises you made to everyone. And as I've said before, God is someone who actually doesn't get upset when we remind him of what he said. And he wants us to be remembering his promises. He never forgets them, but he wants us to call them to mind for our own good. And so Moses intercedes, and verse 14, God relents. He's not going to do it after all, which of course, again, God's not surprised. He knew. So Moses has the tablets of God, comes down and meets with Joshua on his way down. Joshua says, hey, war here. And Moses says, that ain't victory, that ain't defeat. Those people are singing. So this is not cool what they're going to be coming down to. So reactions, thoughts, comments, questions on God's conversation with Moses, him interceding and getting ready to come on down and take care of business. Yeah.
When they came to Aaron, asking him to make them a god.
Yeah.
That wasn't the whole 2 million plus people that were there? Was it a smaller group?
Good question. This is pretty much mostly the group as a whole. Now, could we say that the 2.5 million people that were there, 100% were on board with this? There may be some dissenters in there. We could leave room for some common sense thing, but the general thrust, the wave of the mob mentality here was in this direction, which is why, as we mentioned earlier, it was disappointing that Aaron, the high priest, would give in to this rather than being the leader to keep him focused on God. He went along and said, okay. And so, however many there were that weren't on board with this, it was not significant enough to make a difference or even be recorded. This was the way of the people here. So let's read on verse 19 here. Go 19 to 29. It came about as soon as Moses approached the camp, he saw the calf and the people dancing. And Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. Then he took the calf which they had made and completely burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it over the surface of the water, and made the sons of Israel drink it. Then Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you, that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Do not let the anger of my Lord burn. You know the people yourself, that they are prone to evil. For they said to me, 'Make us a god for us, who will go before us.' For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him. So I said to them, 'Whoever has any gold, let them tear it off.' Then they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf."
Don't you hate it when that?
Yeah, I'm glad we can. Yeah, right. Yeah. So verse 25, now when Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control to the point of being an object of ridicule among their enemies, Moses then stood at the gate of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered together to him. And he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says." Exodus 32:27. "Every man of you put his sword on his thigh, and go back and forth from gate to gate in the camp, and kill every man his brother, and every man his friend, and every man his neighbor." So the sons of Levi did as Moses instructed, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Then Moses said, "Dedicate yourselves today to the Lord, for every man has been against his son and against his brother, in order that he may bestow a blessing upon you today." We'll pause there with verse 29. And so as we see here, just as in other cases, we'll see in scripture, the people rebel against God, they defy God, they take matters into their own hands. So there is a consequence that comes. There's a plague of death or a slaughter of the people that needs to be happening until it is stopped and it's intervened. So only 3,000 were killed here. Does that mean that only 3,000 participated? No, this was a mass thing, as we talked about. But that was where it stopped. And verse 35, we'll get to next week, talks about there being this plague because of what they did here. So this plague of death being carried out here by the Levites who were faithful and drew to God's side. And here, as we saw in the film, here is that cemetery in this area over here. So let me go right here, click on the little dude, click on that thing. So here's a photosphere showing what we saw in the film, that stone. And we've got this, he says, like an area of 21 football fields. And there's never been large populations here. So why would you need a mass graveyard where no one's lived? Well, if you got up to 3,000 dead as a result of this, there you go. And they're buried outside the camp. So lots to talk about here. We'll pick up a lot of it next week, but any reactions, thoughts, comments, questions on the golden calf, the plague of death carried out by the Levites, and then the mass grave that we have here. Well, so in the case of it being Easter, I have a nice little bonus for us.
I was gonna hit the doorbell.
Get it. There's Carolyn and her family. Uh, they're in one of the other rooms. So just for a quick couple of minutes, happy Resurrection Sunday, happy Easter. Now, you may have heard some things about Easter and paganism and all that stuff. Well, here's a little explanation from a gentleman by the name of Wes Huff on this whole paganism thing with Easter.
Starting right off the bat, we need to get the idea out of the way that the name Easter has anything to do with pagan deities. This is super common, and memes and articles online abound with the point that the supposed connections to Babylonian and Assyrian goddesses like Ishtar or the Anglo-Saxon Ostara is the culprits. The problem is, however, that these claims lack true credibility and substance. The name Easter, to celebrate the time of Jesus' death and resurrection, is only a reality in Germanic languages like English. If you look at basically any other language or non-Germanic linguistic heritage, and especially those with Latin or Greek origins, you're going to find it being called Pashka, deriving its origins from the Jewish celebration of Passover, which occurs around the exact same time. Trying to connect the word Easter with the name Ishtar is what we call an association fallacy. In other words, it's a conclusion drawn based on the similar sounding words, but in reality is an irrelevant association as the linguistic, cultural, and etymological roots don't cross paths. The Christian celebration of Easter and the Babylonian goddess Ishtar have about as much to do with each other as Steven Seagal has to do with the beach seagull. Beyond the fact that seagull and seagull sound similar, they're completely unrelated, and the same goes for Easter and Ishtar. The other claim is that the name Easter comes from the Anglo-Saxon Germanic springtime goddess Ostara.
Until the day that Jesus Christ crawled out of his stinky old grave, folks would paint eggs with dandelions, bring her for her to exchange as gifts the first sign of spring in her name, Ostara.
The shocking evidence is out there. It's right there in the Twitter files, in the findings from Dode.
They still do. On my festival days, they still feast on eggs and rabbit and candy. They do it in my name.
However, there is only one source for anything on Ostara, and that's a writing from the 7th century by the English monk St. Bede. There is no other reference in any other sources, Christian or pagan, to Ostara. In fact, the name Ostara has an etymological connection to the ancient Germanic word ostaro, which simply means springtime. Because of this conspicuous lack of anything concerning who Ostara was, how, why, where, or when she was worshipped, or really anything else about her, a good portion of scholars think that either Bede made her up, was misinformed, or misspoke when he mentioned her. So where does the name Easter come from then? While reading the literature, you'll find that there really is little agreement on the origin of the name. However, most of the scholarly consensus comes around the fact that the celebration usually fell on what was, once again, in Germanic-speaking areas, called Ostermana, the 4th month on the Old English calendar. Resurrection Sunday almost always fell on Ostaromana. And so the name of the month, shortened to the beginning of the word, stuck as the name of the celebration, Easter. Think of something like the 4th of July as the common name for Independence Day in the United States, or Cinco de Mayo in Mexico, which celebrates the anniversary of Mexico's victory over the French on May 15th, 1862. These two events have less to do with the month than they do with the fact that the event they're remembering happens to fall on that month. And so the name derives from the timing. Christians starting to call the celebration of Resurrection Sunday Easter probably stemmed from a similar premise. Okay, while that might make sense.
And he goes on to talk about Easter eggs and bunnies and all that stuff. So we'll stop our screen share from there. So have no fear, the name Easter has nothing to do with paganism and all that stuff. We can say Easter and it's a-okay. We can even enjoy Easter eggs. We can enjoy bunnies. I've told you the horror story of when I had my first hollow bunny and like, what foul sin against humanity is this? I didn't know they made hollow bunnies. I felt I'd been robbed. So, and I won't admit what age I was when that happened, but anyway, any final thoughts, comments, questions on anyone from these things we have considered this morning?
Well, that's kind of, it is kind of good information to have because like, you know, you see people on the internet, you know, arguing about, you know, how you can't have both, right? You can't celebrate both or enjoy both, you know, kind of like Christmas, right?
Oh, yeah.
Christmas too. And, you know, it's kind of a shame that, you know, it has to be like that.
Right. And I understand good intentioned people wanting to play it safe and hearing that there might be a possibility of something, not wanting to go anywhere near that. And so I agree completely. But here's the thing. Let's find out more information. Let's see if that's really the case or not. And so that's where we're able to see, as he pointed out, Easter just refers to the month and has nothing to do with any of that pagan stuff. So we're okay there. So anyway, we'll go ahead and stop our share. We'll go ahead and stop our recording here and get ready to go before the Lord in song together.